are adequate. Well, that was this broadcast 24 hours ago, discussing the case of Dr. Craig Spencer, the latest case of Ebola in America. Dr. Spencer went to Africa to help Ebola patients, and when he returned to New York a week ago, he traveled all over the city for 6 days, as no quarantine was required. Not even for a medical worker who just spent weeks dealing with sick Ebola patients. Late this afternoon, the governors of New York and New Jersey decided to change that, putting their own mandatory quarantine rules in place. Listen.
Voluntary quarantine. No, it's almost an oxymoron to me. You know, this is a very serious situation. Voluntary quarantine, raise your right hand and promise you're going to stay home for 21 days, right?
We tried voluntary quarantine once with the NBC News crew, and within a day or two they violated their agreement with us, and then we issued a mandatory order. The stakes are just too high to count on people to do it. We have the legal authority to do it. We're doing it.
Governor Christie and I believe that in this area we need guidelines and procedures that go further.
Joining me now, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who's a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and former deputy commissioner of the FDA. Doctor, good to see you tonight. And
Thanks.
So, do you agree with their move or not?
Well, I think it's a good idea to put in place more active monitoring of people who are coming over from the affected region. This does seem to be targeted towards healthcare workers, and I think we need to recognize that if we're going to do that and put these healthcare workers into a mandatory quarantine, we're going to discourage healthcare workers from going over there. So we may help ourselves in the short term, but hurt ourselves in the long term by exacerbating the problem over there because they need more healthcare workers. So I think we ought to think about, along with these measures, ways to try to offset the impact of these, and that wasn't part of the announcement today.
How can they do that? Because there are some reports that these doctors who go and help with Doctors Without Borders, these are not necessarily rich men, in fact, or women. Most of the time they're not. And so the issue is you tell them they're going to be quarantined, not be able to see their family and their friends and work for 3 weeks when they return to the States, and they think, geez, I don't know if I can afford that.
Right. Well, you could compensate them directly. If you're going to put them in a forced quarantine, you can compensate for the time. And the other thing you could do is maybe put them in a more hospitable location, maybe allow them to, quarantine themselves in a vacation spot rather than put them in a government-regulated facility, which sounds like a Howard Johnson's with a Port Authority cop outside. I think we need to think about that. We don't want these steps to, reduce the incentive of healthcare workers to go over there, because right now they need more healthcare workers, and frankly, they need our healthcare workers.
There's no question that we need to be fighting Ebola abroad, and everybody seems to agree that that the best way of protecting ourselves is to make sure we try to eradicate this disease over there, so fewer people are potentially going to come over here with it. But when you hear about this doctor who is, and they say he did everything right, as I said in that clip, he did everything right. He was self-monitoring. He was taking his temperature twice a day. And the problem is, I know you can't get Ebola unless you're symptomatic, but what people are saying is, how are we supposed to feel comfortable that 12 hours before he detected his fever, he was in an Uber car, he was on the L train, he was on the A train, he was on the 1 train, he went to 2 bowling alleys, and he ate at a restaurant, and we're supposed to believe that it was those 12 hours that made all the difference, and he was definitely not contagious at all when he was at the bowling alley versus the next morning.
No, I agree with you. Contagion isn't a binary event. Look, we're not going to be able to fully reduce our risk here until we get the epidemic under control. I'll give you an example. We're not going to put the Bellevue healthcare workers into quarantine, yet they're treating an Ebola patient right now. So we're making a distinction of treating Ebola here versus treating it in West Africa. And frankly, we've shown here in the United States that in our critical care setting, we couldn't protect our healthcare workers in Dallas. So, our healthcare workers here are at risk as well. I'm not suggesting we should put the Bellevue healthcare workers into quarantine, but, there is sort of a weird dichotomy in the policies coming out in a patchwork. It doesn't make a lot of policy sense.
Mm-hmm. And when the people look at the fact that medical workers got Ebola here in the United States who had full, regalia on, and they think, oh my God, a person who had that was at the bowling alley with me last night, and they panic.
Right, and look, I think people should be concerned. This is a very deadly virus. We've shown the ability to treat it here. We have some vaccines and drugs that might be effective. They're
Big
on
time.
The horizon.
Both of the 2 nurses have been declared Ebola-free who got it down in Texas.
Right, and it suggests, we don't know fully what went on with their medical care. It certainly suggests that in the modern healthcare system, the rate of death is going to be a lot lower, probably. We knew that. It also is at least suggested that maybe the antiviral drugs that they're getting could be effective, and I think we also need to think about how to roll those out on a wider basis in Africa.
It's been remarkable how a week ago tonight we showed Nina Pham airlifted hospital, hazmat suits basically all around her. And today she's hugging the President of the United States and coming on camera saying she cannot wait to get back home. Look at her. She looks awesome to get back home to her dog. She misses that little dog. Dr. Gottlieb, thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot.